What does grief mean to you? Is there even a purpose in living when we all know that the finish point is death? Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is Youmna and this is youmsbooks. I spent the last week of December devouring Sally Rooney's last novel, Intermezzo. And let's just say I have some things to say. I'm just about ready to talk about it after spending another 10 days, the first days of 2025, trying to digest everything. I will try to keep this video essay spoiler free for those of you who haven't read it yet. However, be aware that the novel touches on very sensible topics and I will list the trigger warnings in the description down below. Please leave this video if you don't feel safe around any of these topics. Intermezzo was one of the most anticipated novels of 2024. Although I do often recommend reading her first novel, Normal People, neither did I finish Beautiful World, Where Are You? Nor Conversations with Friends, so I don't consider myself as a huge fan of her work. However, upon finishing Intermezzo, I immediately felt the need to write about it and, as I said, kind of make sense out of everything. I annotated so much and I'm here to talk about it. Let us begin with the where and when. Intermezzo is set in Ireland between Dublin and its suburban area after 2020. The pandemic is just mentioned at some point, so that's how we kind of learn the context of everything. Now for the who. In the span of 3 months, we follow the trajectories of two brothers, Peter and Ivan, who have just lost their father and who are grieving. Peter is the eldest. He is a lawyer in his 30s living in Dublin, who, the least we can say, is struggling managing his two relationships, one with his long-term ex-girlfriend Sylvia and another one with Naomi, who's 10 years younger than him. And on the other hand, we have Ivan, a 22-year-old self-identified socially awkward chess competitor. We know this much based on the blurb, but how would I qualify this novel? Is it a romance novel or a psychological novel, or maybe a coming-of-age novel? To me, it was a little bit of everything and so much more. But if I must condense my thoughts, I think Intermezzo not only challenges social conventions, it also portrays the possibility of life within the realm of death. Alright, so I organized this video in two big parts. The first one I entitled To Live is to Oppose. In the second part, I will touch even more on the consumerism aspect of the novel and how Sally Rooney shows that to live is actually to consume. One thing I particularly love about Sally Rooney's work is her ability to create characters and narratives that are both authentic, believable, and just multi-dimensional. In Intermezzo, we have two main characters who have very few in common, despite being brothers. And as a reader, I often found myself comparing and opposing them, not only because of the plot, but also because of the structure. Indeed, I believe the structure is a comparison tool. The novel is divided into 3 parts, and each part is divided into chapters, which alternate between Peter's and Ivan's points of view. So on one hand, we have Ivan's chapters, which are written in a rather traditional way, with conventional syntax, world building, and punctuation. And on the other hand, we have Peter's chapters, which are more in a stream of consciousness style, with incomplete sentences, which make his character more complex and more raw. You really feel like you're inside his head. And the more I read, the more I felt close to him as a character. Another thing is that the characterization of the two main characters is made through the lens of the other one. You actually learn more about Peter through Ivan's point of view and the contrary. So you learn about Ivan through Peter's memories of him, which kind of makes it all a bit unreliable. There is also a cast of female characters which I found really well written and who brought a kind of lightness to the characterization of the brothers. Yet in the end, it is up to us as readers to perceive Peter and Ivan as we wish, and that's the whole point, I think, of characterization. Let's get a bit deeper into the story and into the characters. We do have two brothers, and we quickly understand that they both grew up in a difficult family context. Peter is 10 years older than Ivan, which as it is, creates a power struggle. Peter seems more advanced in life. He has a job, he's had many relationships, and on the other hand we have Ivan, who's just struggling with life and who's unsure of what he wants to do professionally. But in fact, Peter is also the one brother who escaped this difficult family context much earlier than Ivan. Upon their parents' divorce, Ivan is forced to live in joint custody between his father and his mother, while Peter just gets to escape this difficult family context, and that makes a huge difference. Here we go again with the topos of confrontation and opposition, and I thought it's so touching to see that the more they grew up, the more they grew apart. So this complex family dynamic leads Peter and Ivan to become strangers, and I do believe that the figure of the mother contributes to this distance. Their mother is described as being completely absent and resigning towards them. However, she is loving and dedicated entirely to her new family. She often pits the two brothers against each other. However, she will at some point and kind of unknowingly become the bridge that brings the two brothers together. The question of the mother is also developed through the characters of Naomi and Margaret, who both have difficult relationships with their mothers. We have Naomi, whose mother is an addict and who's at some point characterized as being her mother's mother, which is kind of interesting because throughout the novel, Naomi is the more naive character. She is the one that's the less responsible. Margaret's mother is another example of failed motherhood. She totally fails to support her emotionally, while Margaret supports her financially. The last character who has a complex relation with the theme of motherhood is Sylvia. So we understand quite early on in the novel that Sylvia has had an accident which prevents her from having physical intimacy and therefore bearing children. And I thought Sylvia was the epitome of the character who's grieving for her future that cannot exist, a future that is not possible. Even though the topic of motherhood is not developed extensively, I do believe it brings another layer of understanding to this complex story as a whole, especially regarding the subject of opposition and paradox. Therefore, all the characters contribute to the concept of opposition. And the more I read, the more I couldn't help thinking of the primitive opposition of life and death. First of all, the father's death is the disruptive element that allows Peter and Ivan to come alive as characters. And again, with the contradictions and the oppositions, we have some characters who are living very negative emotions and despair, depression, depressive thoughts, and on the other hand we have other characters who just are living in bubbles of happiness and who are in a sense trying to outlive death. Alright, now moving on to my second part, to live is to consume. Following on from the opposition of life and death, the novel made me realize just how reliant we are to consumerism. Sally Rooney is very well known for her leftist ideas and her Marxist characters, and one thing the novel shows is that the only possibility of consuming is when we are alive. So we have two characters very much alive, Peter and Ivan, and both of them actually can qualify as outcasts in the intermezzo world. So I'll try to explain why and how difficult it can be to be an outcast in a capitalist society. So Peter and Ivan Kubek are both of East Europe origin. They were born in Ireland, but they still have their father's name, which sounds foreign, and they build their whole identity based on this duality. The novel describes very well Peter's pressure to fit in with his colleagues who are upper class. Peter spent a good part of his life trying to reject his foreign origins, trying to erase his accent and perfect the Dublin accent. At some point he even says he wishes he had his mother's Irish family name instead of his father's. And just like every Sally Rooney book, Intermezzo really deals with social class and the struggle of class in Ireland. Peter has succeeded. He's climbed the social ladder. He's become a very successful lawyer. He's graduated from university. He's owning his apartment. And I truly felt Peter's need to escape his middle class, rural upbringing. And upon doing so, he kind of fulfills the social conventions of capitalism and capitalist society. On the other hand, we have Ivan, who, as I said, is struggling to find his purpose professionally. in a way, he is quite irrelevant to the capitalist society. He's not bringing any money, he's not making any money. On the contrary, he's focusing on his chess. Although he is getting paid for his passion, his hobby is the way he's making some money, at least. And again, with the mother figure, their mother really pits the two brothers against each other regarding their professions. Ivan feels he is useless because his mother keeps telling him to find a real job. He's not making that much money compared to his brother. And again, here we have this oppressive opposition between the two brothers, one who's fulfilling the social conventions and norms, and one who is totally off track. Finally, regarding outcasts and the capitalist system, we have the character of Naomi. It's very interesting because she has been struggling financially, and the relationship she has with Peter is a bit complex because she often asks him money, which he gives to her. At the same time, she created an OnlyFans, or at least a similar platform, on which she publishes naked pictures of herself in exchange with money. And in doing so, she's both a victim and the perpetuator of the patriarchal capitalist system. With this patriarchal system that feeds on female inferiority. Now moving on to my final point, which is loving means consuming one another. Indeed, as we know, in Sally Rooney's novels, romance never stands on itself. It is rather more of a tool or an excuse to deal with other topics that gravitate around relationships. As human beings, consumption is part of our identity. We consume material goods, but we also consume moments, we consume feelings, we consume people. And one sentence that perfectly describes this feeling of consumption within life is actually on the cover of the book. The demands of other people do not dissolve, they only multiply, more and more complex, more difficult, which is another way she thinks of saying more life, more and more of life. Peter's two very complex relationships with Sylvia and Naomi call into question just why would he do this? Is it because he's lacking attention and affection? What does it bring him? To some extent, it shows that we cannot be satisfied with only one person. We need to multiply relationships to fulfill our need of affection. And I thought it really explored the idea that human nature is always dissatisfied and always wishes for more, always needs more and more and more. And I find that this idea was really well explored. And weaving consumerism with love and intimacy was just a brilliant idea by Sally Rooney, which I enjoyed reading about, even though at the beginning of the book we don't really understand and we don't really quite grasp Peter's character, Peter's self-absorbed, selfish personality. The more I read about him and his relationships and the complexities of his mind, and the more I could understand why he would make such problematic choices within his relationships. This is another thing Sally Rooney does really well, is just creating, as I said, multidimensional characters who are flawed and who are just human beings. Finally, we have Ivan and Margaret's relationship, which is just completely outside the norms, especially in the rural, small-town environment in which Margaret is living and has been living her whole life. Margaret becomes the victim of gossips and of judgment from her peers because of her relationship with Ivan. She cannot fully love Ivan because of the social pressure, and at the same time, being intimate with him makes her whole and makes her fully happy. And I thought this love story was so inspiring. I also really enjoyed the scenes of physical intimacy because they truly portrayed and illustrated the concept of consumerism in a relationship. To love someone is to share with them moments. It means both giving them a part of ourselves, but also taking a part of themselves for us. So it's an exchange, a continual exchange. It's a transaction in the end. Of course, now it's up to us as readers to agree to this definition of love, which can sometimes feel cynical, but which I did personally find beautiful. Nothing he has done or felt in this regard before has prepared him remotely for this new experience with Margaret. The experience of mutual desire, to feel an interpenetration of thought between the two of them, understanding her, looking at her and knowing, yes, without even speaking, what she feels and wants, and knowing that she understands him also completely. In her eyes, the look of warmth, the flickering kind of amusement, acknowledging. And this relates, he thinks, to her beauty, her thick dark hair in its loose unraveling braid, her full expressive mouth, the supple roundness of her arms, her breasts. This quote just encapsulates the idea of an exchange between two human beings, and I just found that truly touching. And to finish it off, here is my overall review. As you may have guessed, after these 20-ish minutes of me ranting about Intermezzo, this book has become one of my favorite novels. I thought it was lyrical, thought-provoking, authentic. But in a way, Intermezzo was also a very ambitious novel. Sally Rooney wanted to tackle a lot of societal topics. Perhaps she didn't really manage to develop these topics and ideas fully. As I said, I think Sally Rooney's writing style has matured in this novel. A lot of passages really moved me, both in Peter's chapters and Ivan's chapters, which were of two very different writing styles, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading them and studying them, actually. But to answer my initial question, what does grief mean to you, or rather, what does it mean to me? Grief is necessarily linked to death, but the novel really helped me understand and realize how lucky I am to be alive. And I think grief can definitely help you do that, to realize how full of possibilities life is. Death is not necessarily the end of everything. On the contrary, I think it's just a sign that new beginnings are possible. Alright, if you're still here, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made myself clear on the ideas that I wanted to get across. And of course, I would love to read what you thought about Intermezzo, or if this video just made you want to discover this novel, even if it doesn't need any more publicity and has been marketed enough, I think, during the end of 2024. I hope I'll see you in my next video, and until then, peace.